The storm rolled across the Wyoming plains like the wrath of God himself, and Rebecca Garrison knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here alone. Her traveling companions had made the decision swiftly once the wagon wheel cracked. The Henderson family, who had agreed to let her ride with them to Fort Bridger in exchange for her sewing skills, looked at the darkening sky, then at her considerable size, then back at the sky. Without speaking the obvious truth aloud, they redistributed her belongings among their remaining functional wagon and the pack mules. Mrs. Henderson pressed a canteen into Rebecca's hands with eyes that would not meet hers, and Mr. Henderson muttered something about sending help from town. But they both knew, as Rebecca knew, that no help would come in time. The storm was minutes away, and she could not fit comfortably in their already overcrowded wagon. Her weight made her a liability they could not afford. She watched them disappear into the growing darkness, the thunder already rumbling like an angry beast in the distance. At 24 years old, Rebecca had survived many humiliations because of her size, but this felt like the final judgment. The universe had decided she was not worth saving. The first drops of rain struck her face like cold accusations. She tried to find shelter, but the landscape offered nothing except scrub brush and rocks. Within minutes, the sky opened up completely, and the world became nothing but water and wind and bone-chilling cold. Her dress, already heavy with layers of fabric meant to conceal her shape, absorbed the rain until it felt like she wore the weight of the ocean itself. Each step became harder than the last. The mud sucked at her boots. Lightning split the sky so close she could smell the burn of it. Rebecca fell to her knees in the mud, water streaming down her face, unable to tell any more which drops were rain and which were tears. This was it then. This was how her story ended, alone and abandoned on the Wyoming plains in 1878, unloved and unmourned. She thought of her mother, dead these past 6 years. She thought of her father, who drank himself to death shortly after. She thought of all the young men who had looked past her, through her, anywhere but at her. She thought of the word spinster and how it had attached itself to her name like a brand. She did not hear the horse approach through the roar of the storm. She did not see the rider until he was dismounting right beside her, a tall figure in a dripping hat and duster coat. "Madam," his voice cut through the storm, urgent and commanding. "Madam, can you stand?" Rebecca looked up at him, rain blurring her vision. He was young, perhaps her age or slightly older, with a strong jaw and eyes that reflected lightning. But it was the expression on his face that shocked her. Not disgust, not calculation, just pure concern. "I cannot," she said, her voice breaking. "Please just go save yourself." "Not a chance," he said, and the absolute certainty in his voice left no room for argument. He looked around quickly, assessing. "There's a rock formation about half a mile north. It will have to do. My horse can carry us both." "No," Rebecca said, shame flooding through her even as she shivered with cold. "Your horse cannot. I am too heavy." The cowboy looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed across his face that Rebecca could not identify. "My horse Goliath has carried elk carcasses over these plains. He is the strongest mount I have ever owned, and even if there was a question, I would not leave you here to die. Now we are wasting time and this storm is getting worse." He reached for her and she flinched, but his hands were gentle as they gripped her arms, helping her to her feet. She swayed, dizzy from cold and exhaustion. Without asking permission, he simply swept her up into his arms. Rebecca gasped, waiting for him to buckle, to drop her, to grunt with strain. But he was stronger than he looked, and though she was no light burden, he carried her to his horse with steady steps. Getting her onto Goliath was awkward and undignified, but the cowboy managed it with a matter-of-fact efficiency that somehow robbed the moment of its potential for humiliation. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around to grip the reins, and suddenly Rebecca was more aware of his warmth than the cold of the storm. "Hold on," he said close to her ear, and then they were moving. The ride to the rocks felt both endless and instant. Rebecca had never been this close to a man before, and despite the circumstances, despite the cold and the fear, some part of her could not help but notice the solid strength of him behind her, the way his arms formed a protective circle, the smell of leather and rain and something indefinably masculine. She wanted to weep from the intimacy of it, from the knowledge that this was likely the only time a man would hold her this way. The rock formation loomed out of the darkness, a jutting outcrop that formed a shallow cave, barely deep enough to be called shelter, but enough to break the worst of the wind and rain. The cowboy dismounted and helped Rebecca down, then quickly led Goliath deeper into the protected space. There was barely enough room for the three of them. "I need to get you out of those wet clothes," the cowboy said, already shrugging out of his duster. "I have nothing else to wear," Rebecca said through chattering teeth. "I have a bedroll and a spare shirt in my saddlebag. It will have to do." He turned his back, giving her privacy. "My name is Yates Whitmore, by the way, since we are about to become much better acquainted than is proper." Despite everything, Rebecca felt a hysterical laugh bubble up. "Rebecca Garrison. And I suppose propriety went out the window the moment you lifted me onto your horse." "I would do it again," Yates said, his back still turned. "And I will do whatever needs doing to make sure you survive this night. Now please, get those wet things off before you catch your death." Rebecca's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, clumsy from cold. The fabric clung to her skin, reluctant to release her. It took far longer than it should have, and several times she almost asked for help before her pride stopped her. Finally, she stood shivering in her undergarments, which were also soaked through. "Those two," Yates said, somehow knowing without looking. "I will not turn around, you have my word." "You are being very kind to someone you do not know," Rebecca said, working at the laces of her corset with numb fingers. "My mother raised me to help those in need," Yates replied. "And I know enough. I know you were left behind in a storm. I know you need help. That is all I need to know." Rebecca finally managed to remove the last of her wet clothing. She grabbed the shirt from where Yates had laid it out, pulling it over her head. It was huge on her, hanging past her knees, but it was blessedly dry. The bedroll was a thick wool blanket, and she wrapped it around herself gratefully. "I am decent," she said softly. Yates turned around, and even in the dim light of the storm-darkened cave, Rebecca could see his eyes travel over her, assessing her condition. He moved closer, and she resisted the urge to shrink back. "Your lips are blue," he observed. "How long were you out there before I found you?" "I do not know. Perhaps half an hour, too long." He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I am going to put my arm around you, for warmth. I hope you will not take offense." Rebecca thought she might cry again. "I cannot imagine taking offense at anything that might keep me alive." His arm came around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. The warmth of him was shocking, like pressing against a stove. She could not help herself. She burrowed into it, letting her head rest against his shoulder. If this was the only time in her life she would know a man's embrace, she would take what comfort she could. "You are not from around here," Rebecca said after a moment, needing to break the silence with something other than the sound of the rain. "What gives me away?" Yates asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Your speech. It is more refined than most cowboys I have encountered." "My mother was a schoolteacher from Boston. She insisted on proper grammar, even when my father and I came in from working cattle all day covered in dust and manure. There was affection in his voice when he spoke of them. They have a small ranch about 10 miles from Fort Bridger. I was on my way back from delivering horses to a buyer in Rock Springs when the storm caught me. Then I am fortunate you were traveling this road, Rebecca said. I almost was not. I was going to camp for the night about 5 miles back, but something told me to keep riding. He paused. I am not a particularly religious man, but I have learned to listen when I get those feelings. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside their small shelter. Rebecca could feel her body slowly warming, though she still shivered. Yates pulled the blanket more tightly around her. You can tell me to mind my own business, he said carefully, but what were you doing out here? Were those people who left you family? No, Rebecca said, the word bitter in her mouth. They were a family traveling west. I paid them to take me to Fort Bridger, where I hoped to find work as a seamstress. When the wagon wheel broke and the storm came, they made a practical decision. There was not room in their remaining wagon for all of us and the supplies they needed. I was the logical choice to leave behind. That is not practical, that is cowardice and cruelty, Yates said, his voice hard. They left you to die. They left the fat woman to die, Rebecca corrected, surprised by her own bluntness. I am sure they justified it to themselves. Perhaps they even convinced themselves they truly would send help. Your size has nothing to do with your worth, Yates said firmly, and everything to do with their lack of character. Rebecca pulled back slightly to look at him. In the dimness, she could just make out his features, the strong line of his jaw, the serious expression in his eyes. You are a very unusual man, Yates Whitmore. My mother always said I got my father's strength and her stubbornness. It makes for an interesting combination. He met her gaze steadily. I mean what I said. Your size does not diminish you. Anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. The world is full of fools then, Rebecca said quietly. Perhaps, but that does not make them right. The storm continued to howl outside, but Rebecca found herself less afraid than she had been. The simple presence of another human being, one who spoke to her with respect and kindness, was more warming than any blanket. Tell me about Boston, she said. I have never been anywhere so grand. Yates smiled. I have not either, in truth. My mother left when she was 18 to marry my father. She met him when he was back east buying breeding stock. By all accounts, her family was horrified that she was running off with a Wyoming cattle rancher. But she said she took one look at my father and knew her life was meant to be bigger than tea parties and social calls. That sounds like a love story, Rebecca said wistfully. It is. They still look at each other like newlyweds, even after 27 years of marriage. His voice softened. My father says my mother is the best thing that ever happened to him. He tells her every day. How wonderful, Rebecca said, to be loved like that. You speak as if you believe it is impossible for you. Rebecca looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the blanket. I am a realist, Mr. Whitmore. I know what I am. I have known it since I was a girl watching the other girls get asked to dances while I sat with the chaperones. I am not the kind of woman men write love stories about. Then men are bigger fools than I thought, Yates said. And please call me Yates. I think sharing a cave in a thunderstorm puts us past formalities. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. You do not have to say kind things to me. You have already saved my life. You owe me no pretty words. I do not say things I do not mean, Yates replied. It is one of my worst qualities, according to my mother. She says I am too blunt, but I prefer honesty to flattery. He paused. What I see before me is a woman who has survived something that would have broken many people. You did not give up out there. You could have laid down in the mud and let the cold take you, but you did not. That speaks to strength of character. That is beautiful." Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes. "Please do not," she whispered. "It is harder when people are kind." "Then I am sorry, because I intend to be very kind," Yates said gently. "You have been shown too much cruelty already." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now. Rebecca found her eyes growing heavy despite the cold still seeping into her bones. The warmth of Yates beside her and the exhaustion of fear and cold were pulling her toward sleep. "Rest," Yates said, as if reading her thoughts. "I will keep watch. The storm should break by morning, and then we can make our way to my family's ranch. It is much closer than Fort Bridger." "I cannot impose," Rebecca protested weakly. "You are not imposing, I am inviting. There is a difference." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "Sleep, Rebecca, you are safe now." And despite every reason she had to doubt, despite every experience that had taught her not to trust in kindness, Rebecca found herself believing him. She let her eyes close, let her body relax against his solid warmth, and drifted into an exhausted sleep. She woke to gray morning light and the sound of dripping water. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world. For a moment, Rebecca could not remember where she was, and then it all came flooding back. The abandonment, the storm, the cowboy who had saved her life. The cowboy who was no longer beside her. Panic fluttered in her chest until she heard movement outside the cave. She looked down and saw that she was covered with Yates's duster in addition to the blanket, and his hat had been placed carefully within her reach. The gesture touched her more than she could say. Yates appeared in the entrance leading Goliath. His hair was damp, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. He smiled when he saw her awake. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" Rebecca took stock of herself. "Cold still and stiff but alive." "Better than I have any right to feel." "Your clothes are still wet, I am afraid, but my mother will have things you can wear once we reach the ranch. Are you able to ride?" The thought of climbing back on that horse, of being pressed against Yates again in the light of day, made her flush. But she nodded. "Yes, though I fear your horse will not be pleased to carry me again." Yates moved to Goliath and stroked his neck. "What do you say, boy? Can you carry us both home?" The horse nickered softly, and Yates grinned. "See, he is fine. He is more horse than most men could handle, which is why I like him." He helped Rebecca to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Her body ached in every conceivable place, but she was determined not to complain. Yates had already done so much for her. Getting onto the horse was just as awkward as the night before, but Yates was patient and matter-of-fact about it. Once she was settled, he swung up behind her with easy grace, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. "Ready?" he asked. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. As they started moving across the rain-soaked plains, she tried to hold herself stiffly, to minimize the contact between them. But Yates seemed to sense her discomfort. "You can relax," he said gently. "Goliath has a long stride. You will be sore by the time we arrive if you hold yourself so rigid." Slowly, Rebecca let herself ease back against him. His chest was solid and warm against her back, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. They rode in silence for a while, the morning sun burning off the last of the clouds. The landscape was beautiful in its starkness, all rolling plains and distant mountains. Rebecca had traveled from Missouri to Wyoming over the course of 2 months, and she still had not grown accustomed to the vastness of it all. "What made you leave Missouri?" Yates asked, as if once again reading her thoughts. "There was nothing left for me there," Rebecca said simply. "My parents are both dead. I have no siblings. The town where I grew up had nothing to offer me but pitying looks and job prospects as someone's housemaid. I thought perhaps in a new place I might make a fresh start. Fort Bridger could use a good seamstress, Yates said. Mrs. Patterson has been doing alterations, but she is getting on in years and her eyesight is failing. You would have work if you wanted it. You seem very certain of that. I am certain that people need clothes, and someone who can make and mend them is always valuable. The rest is just details. Rebecca smiled despite herself. You make it sound simple. Most things are simpler than we make them, Yates replied. People complicate matters by letting fear and pride get in the way. They rode for another hour before the Whitmore ranch came into view. It was a modest spread, with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and Rebecca could see chickens scratching in a yard near the house. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and food. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. She was small and slim, with dark hair streaked with gray pulled back in a practical bun. When she recognized Yates, her face lit up with relief. "Yates, thank God! We were so worried when the storm hit," she called out. Then she seemed to register that he was not alone. Her expression shifted to concern as she moved quickly toward them. Yates dismounted and then helped Rebecca down. Her legs nearly buckled, stiff from the long ride, but Yates kept a steadying hand on her elbow. "Mother, this is Miss Rebecca Garrison. I found her abandoned in the storm last night." "Rebecca, this is my mother, Catherine Whitmore." Catherine's eyes widened and something fierce and angry flashed across her face. "Abandoned in that storm?" She looked at Rebecca and her expression softened immediately. "You poor dear, come inside at once. You must be frozen through." "I do not want to impose," Rebecca started to say, but Catherine waved her words away. "Nonsense. You are a guest, and you are clearly in need of care. Yates, take care of Goliath. I will get Miss Garrison inside and into something warm." Before Rebecca could protest further, Catherine had her arm and was guiding her toward the house with surprising strength for such a small woman. As they climbed the porch steps, Rebecca glanced back to see Yates watching her, something unreadable in his expression. He caught her looking and smiled, a smile that made her heart do strange things in her chest. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with the smell of fresh bread and coffee filling the air. Catherine led Rebecca to a chair near the fireplace and began stoking the fire higher. "I have some clothes that might work for you," Catherine said, eyeing Rebecca appraisingly. "I am afraid I am much smaller than you, but I have some things from when I was carrying Yates that might do in the meantime. And if not, we can fashion something until proper clothes can be made." Rebecca felt her throat tighten at the casual kindness. "You are very generous, Mrs. Whitmore," Catherine pleads. "And it is not generosity, it is basic human decency, something those people who left you clearly lack." She shook her head, anger flashing again. "To leave someone in a storm like that, I cannot fathom it." "They were frightened," Rebecca said quietly, "and I am not easy to accommodate." Catherine stopped what she was doing and looked at Rebecca directly. "Let me be very clear about something, my dear. Your size does not make you less deserving of help or kindness or basic human compassion. Anyone who thinks otherwise is welcome to take their ignorant opinions and ride them straight out of my county." Rebecca could not help but laugh, though it came out slightly watery. "You sound like your son." "Well, he learned from someone," Catherine said with a satisfied nod. "Now, let me get you those clothes and something hot to eat. You look half-starved." Catherine disappeared up the stairs and Rebecca was left alone by the fire. She looked around the room, taking in the details. It was a home clearly built with love and care. Books lined shelves on one wall. A faded but beautiful quilt hung over the back of a worn sofa. Photographs in simple frames showed a younger Catherine and a handsome man with Yates's strong jaw, as well as several pictures of Yates at various ages. Catherine returned with an armful of clothes and led Rebecca to a small room off the kitchen. "You can change in here. Take your time. I will have food ready when you are done." The clothes were simple but clean and well made. A cotton dress in a soft blue, a bit worn but comfortable. It fit better than Rebecca had dared hope, though it was still tight across her middle. There was also a shawl, warm and thick, that she wrapped around her shoulders gratefully. When she emerged, she found the kitchen table set with more food than she could possibly eat. Bread, butter, jam, fried eggs, bacon, and a large mug of coffee. Catherine gestured to a chair. "Sit, eat. You need to get your strength back." Rebecca sat and picked up the fork, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She had not eaten since the morning before. The food was simple but delicious, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, aware of Catherine watching her with those sharp, kind eyes. The door opened, and Yates came in, his hair still damp from washing up at the pump. He had changed into a fresh shirt, and Rebecca was struck again by how handsome he was, in a rough, outdoorsy way that was so different from the few carefully groomed men she had known back in Missouri. "How are you feeling?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. "Much better, thank you." "Your mother has been incredibly kind. She is good at that," Yates said with a warm smile at Catherine. "Where is father?" "He took the new stallion out to the north pasture early this morning before the storm fully cleared. You know how he is when he has a new horse to work with." Catherine poured coffee for Yates. "He should be back soon." They fell into an easy conversation, Catherine asking Rebecca about her journey west, Yates interjecting with comments about the various towns Rebecca had passed through. Rebecca found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months, perhaps years. There was something about these people, this place, that felt safe. The door opened again, and a man entered who could only be Yates's father. He was tall and broad-shouldered like his son, though his hair was mostly gray and his face was weathered by years of work in the sun. His eyes, the same clear blue as Yates's, swept over the scene, taking in Rebecca with open curiosity. "Walter, this is Miss Rebecca Garrison," Catherine said. "Yates found her abandoned in last night's storm." Walter's expression darkened. "Abandoned, the Hendersons," Yates said. "The family that was heading to Fort Bridger. Their wagon broke and they decided Rebecca was too much trouble to keep with them when the storm hit." Walter muttered something under his breath that was probably not suitable for polite company. Then he moved to Rebecca and held out his hand. "Walter Whitmore, welcome to our home, Miss Garrison. I am sorry for the circumstances that brought you here, but glad my son found you in time." Rebecca shook his hand, noting the calluses and the strength in his grip. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Your family has been very kind." "Just doing what is right," Walter said gruffly. He turned to Yates. "Did you get the horses delivered to Mackenzie?" "I did." "He was pleased with them and paid the full price we agreed on." They launched into a discussion about horses and cattle prices, and Rebecca took the opportunity to study them all. This was what a family looked like, she realized. Not just people bound by blood, but people who clearly loved and respected each other. It was in the way Catherine touched Walter's shoulder as she refilled his coffee. The way Yates and his father argued about the merits of different breeding stock with obvious affection underlying their disagreement. The way they all seemed to move around each other with the ease of long familiarity. Rebecca had not had this since her mother died. The hollow ache of loneliness that she had grown so used to it became almost invisible, suddenly flared bright and painful. "Miss Garrison," Catherine's voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I am fine," Rebecca said quickly. "Just tired, I think." "Of course you are." Yates, Show her to the guest room. She needs proper rest." Catherine stood and began clearing the table with brisk efficiency. "We can discuss plans later, once you have had time to recover." Yates led Rebecca up the stairs to a small but comfortable room with a real bed, a luxury she had not enjoyed in months. The sheets were crisp and clean, the quilt hands stitched in a pattern of interlocking rings. "I cannot thank you enough," Rebecca said, her voice catching, "for everything you and your family have done." Yates looked at her for a long moment, something intense and searching in his gaze. "You do not need to thank me, Rebecca. I did what anyone should have done." "But most would not have," she said softly. "Most would have ridden past." "Then I am glad I am not most people." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Rest as long as you need. You are safe here." After he left, Rebecca sank onto the bed, her mind whirling. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been certain she would die alone in the mud. Now she was in a warm house, wearing clean clothes, having just shared a meal with people who treated her like a human being worthy of respect and care. And then there was Yates. The way he had looked at her this morning, the way his voice softened when he said her name. Rebecca told herself not to be foolish. He was just being kind. He would have done the same for anyone in need. The fact that her heart raced when he was near, that she could still feel the phantom warmth of his arms around her, meant nothing. She was 24 years old and had never been courted. She had no experience with men, no way to judge what was normal friendliness and what was something more. But oh, how she wanted it to be something more. Rebecca lay back on the bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. She would rest for a few hours, and then she would figure out her next steps. She still needed to get to Fort Bridger, still needed to find work and a place to live. She could not stay here indefinitely. No matter how much the thought of leaving already hurt, she closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her down into sleep. Her last conscious thought was of Yates's smile and the way he had said she was beautiful. When Rebecca woke, the sun was lower in the sky, suggesting she had slept for several hours. She sat up slowly, her body still protesting the abuse of the previous day. But she felt more human than she had, more grounded. There was a soft knock on the door. "Miss Garrison, are you awake?" Catherine's voice. "Yes, please come in." Catherine entered carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. "I thought you might be hungry." "Dinner will not be for another few hours, but I know you did not eat much at breakfast." "You are too kind," Rebecca said, accepting the tea gratefully. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, her expression thoughtful. "Yates told me you were hoping to find work in Fort Bridger as a seamstress." "Yes, I am quite skilled with a needle, if I may say so myself. My mother taught me, and I have been doing alterations and making clothes since I was a girl." "Would you be willing to show me your work?" Rebecca hesitated. "I would, but everything I owned was in my trunk with the Hendersons." "I have nothing to show you." "Then would you be willing to make something? I have fabric and supplies. If your work is as good as you say, I might have a proposition for you." Hope fluttered in Rebecca's chest. "What kind of proposition?" "Let me see your skills first. Then we will talk." Catherine stood. "Come down to my sewing room when you are ready. Take your time." After Catherine left, Rebecca quickly finished the tea and biscuits and then made her way downstairs. Catherine's sewing room turned out to be a small addition off the back of the house, with large windows that let in excellent light. It was clearly a space that was well used and well loved, with neat shelves of fabric, spools of thread in every color, and a beautiful sewing machine that Rebecca eyed with admiration. "That is a Wheeler and Wilson," she breathed. "I have only seen pictures of them in catalogs. My husband bought it for me 2 years ago. It makes everything faster, though I still do fine detail work by hand." Catherine gestured to the shelves. "Choose whatever you like and make something. Anything." Show me what you can do." Rebecca moved through the fabric, her fingers trailing over the different textures. She selected a simple calico in a cheerful yellow, some white cotton for contrast, and matching thread. Then she sat at the sewing table and began to work. Her hands knew what to do without her mind needing to direct them. This was the one thing Rebecca had always been confident in, the one skill that had never failed her. She could look at a piece of fabric and see what it could become. She could take something plain and make it beautiful. She made a child's dress, small enough for a girl of perhaps 5 or 6. The calico formed the body and sleeves, while the white cotton created a collar and cuffs. She added tiny tucks at the waist, a detail that was unnecessary but showed skill. The seams were straight and even, the stitches so small they were almost invisible. It took her 3 hours, working steadily while Catherine came and went, bringing her more tea and watching with interest. When Rebecca finally tied off the last thread and held up the finished dress, Catherine's face broke into a broad smile. "That is beautiful work. The stitching is excellent, and the design is charming." She took the dress and examined it closely, turning it inside out to check the seams. "This is better than anything I could produce, and I am not unskilled myself." "Thank you," Rebecca said, pride warming her chest. "Here is my proposition," Catherine said, setting down the dress. "I do alterations for several families in the area, but I have more work than I can handle, especially with my other responsibilities on the ranch. I could use a partner, someone to share the work. The pay would not make you rich, but it would be steady, and you could build a reputation. Eventually, you might take on your own clients." Rebecca stared at her. "You are offering me a job here." "I am offering you a partnership," Catherine corrected. "You would need a place to stay, of course. There is a small cabin about a quarter-mile from here that we have been using for storage. It would need cleaning and some repairs, but it could be made comfortable. Or, if you preferred, you could take the guest room until you are settled." "I do not understand," Rebecca said slowly. "You do not know me. Why would you do this?" Catherine's expression softened. "Because I can see you are skilled and hardworking. Because you need an opportunity, and I am in a position to offer one. Because my son rode through a dangerous storm to bring you to safety, and I trust his judgment of character." She paused. "And because 28 years ago, I was a woman traveling west to marry a man I barely knew, and along the way, I met people who showed me kindness when they did not have to. I like to think I am paying that forward." Rebecca felt tears threatening again. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes. Say you will stay, at least for a while, and give this a try." "Yes," Rebecca whispered. "Yes, I will stay." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, Catherine set Rebecca up in the guest room while Walter and Yates worked on making the small cabin habitable. Rebecca threw herself into work, grateful to have something to occupy her hands and mind. Catherine's clients began bringing their alterations to the ranch, and word spread quickly that Catherine had taken on a partner whose skills were exceptional. Rebecca found herself working on everything from simple hem adjustments to complex alterations of wedding dresses. She made children's clothes and mended work shirts. She even began taking on commissions for new dresses, as women heard about her skill and wanted something special. The work was satisfying in a way few things in her life had been. But it was the Whitmore family themselves that made her feel truly at home. Catherine treated her like a daughter, teaching her tricks for dealing with difficult fabrics and sharing stories about her life in Boston and her early days in Wyoming. Walter was gruff but kind, often bringing her coffee while she worked and asking her opinion on colors for a new shirt he wanted Catherine to make. And then there was Yates. Yates seemed to always be around. He would come in from working with the horses and find excuses to stop by the sewing room. He brought her wildflowers he claimed he just happened to see while riding. He asked her questions about her life, her dreams, her opinions on everything from politics to the best way to cook beans. He made her laugh with stories about growing up on the ranch and his misadventures learning to ride. And the way he looked at her, as if she was fascinating, as if she was beautiful, Rebecca tried not to read too much into it, tried not to let hope take root. But it was becoming increasingly difficult, especially on evenings when the family gathered in the main room and Yates would sit next to her, close enough that their shoulders brushed, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of him. One evening, about 3 weeks after she had arrived, Catherine and Walter retired early, leaving Rebecca and Yates alone. Rebecca was working on embroidering a pillowcase, one of several she was making for a client in Fort Bridger, while Yates was supposedly reading a book about horse breeding. But she had noticed him glancing up at her more often than he turned pages. Finally, he set the book aside. "Rebecca, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, not looking up from her work. "Why do you always seem surprised when I seek out your company?" That made her pause. She set down her embroidery and met his gaze. "What do you mean? Every time I come to talk to you, every time I sit with you, you look at me as if you cannot quite believe I am there, as if you are waiting for me to realize I have made some kind of mistake." Rebecca felt heat creep up her neck. "I suppose I am not accustomed to people, particularly men, wanting to spend time with me." "Why not?" Yates asked, his voice gentle but genuinely curious. "You know why," Rebecca said quietly. "Look at me, Yates. I am looking at you. I have been looking at you for weeks now." "What do you think I see?" Rebecca could not meet his eyes. "You see a fat woman who should be grateful for any scrap of attention she receives." "That is not even close to what I see," Yates said, his voice sharp now. "I see a woman who survived abandonment and nearly died in a storm, then immediately asked to start working rather than taking time to recover. I see someone who creates beauty with her hands, who makes my mother laugh, who has an opinion on everything and is not afraid to share it. I see someone brave and strong and, yes, beautiful." "Please do not," Rebecca whispered. "Do not say things like that if you do not mean them." Yates stood and moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. The touch sent electricity through her body. "I mean every word. Rebecca, I have been trying for 3 weeks to show you how I feel, but you keep brushing it off as if it does not matter, as if I am just being polite." "What are you saying?" Rebecca asked, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I am saying that from the moment I saw you in that storm, something in me shifted. I am saying that every day since you arrived here has been better than the day before because you are here. I am saying that I think about you constantly, that I look for excuses to be near you, that I dream about you at night." He squeezed her hands. "I am saying that I am courting you, Rebecca, or at least I have been trying to. I thought I was being obvious." "You cannot mean this," Rebecca said, even as everything in her wanted desperately to believe him. "I am not the kind of woman men court. I am not beautiful or graceful. I am fat and plain and ordinary." "You are none of those things," Yates said firmly. "And I think you know you are not ordinary. You have a sharp mind and a kind heart and a talent that makes you special. As for the rest, I think you are beautiful exactly as you are. I would not change a single thing about you." "But why?" Rebecca asked, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "Why would you want me when you could have anyone?" "Because I do not want anyone, I want you." Yates reached up and gently wiped her tears away. "That night in the storm, when I was riding through the rain, I kept thinking that I had to get home, that it was foolish to be out in this weather. And then I saw you, and I knew why I was there. I was meant to find you, not just to save your life, but because you were meant to be in my life." "That sounds like something from a novel," Rebecca said, but her voice was soft, wondering. "Maybe, But that does not make it less true. Yates smiled at her, tender and hopeful. You are perfect for me, Rebecca Garrison. Everything about you is perfect for me. And I would like very much to court you properly, with flowers and walks and all the things a woman deserves when a man is trying to win her heart. I think you may have already won it, Rebecca admitted, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff. I have been trying not to fall in love with you, but I do not think I have been very successful. The joy that lit Yates's face was brighter than any sunrise. You are making me the happiest man in Wyoming. Just Wyoming? Rebecca asked, smiling through her tears. The whole world, Yates said, but I will start with Wyoming and work my way up. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Rebecca did not want to pull away. She had spent her entire life pulling away, protecting herself, expecting rejection. For once, she wanted to be brave enough to reach for happiness. When his lips met hers, it was soft and gentle and everything a first kiss should be. Rebecca felt like something inside her that had been frozen for years suddenly thawed. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying again, but these were different tears. These were tears of joy. I cannot believe this is real, she whispered. It is real, Yates assured her. As real as you and me sitting here. And I intend to prove it to you every day until you believe it. They talked late into the night, sitting close together on the sofa, hands intertwined. Yates told her about his dreams for the ranch, about the horse breeding program he wanted to develop. Rebecca told him about the dress shop she had always fantasized about opening, a beautiful space where women of all sizes could come and find clothes that made them feel special. You could do that here, Yates said. Fort Bridger is growing. There is definitely a need for a good dress shop. It would take money I do not have, Rebecca said practically, but it is nice to dream. Then we will work toward it, Yates said. Dreams are meant to be chased, not just admired from afar. When they finally went to their separate rooms, Rebecca felt like she was floating. She lay in bed, replaying every word, every touch, hardly believing any of it was real. Yates Whitmore wanted to court her. More than that, he had said she was perfect for him. Her, Rebecca Garrison, who had spent so many years being invisible or worse, being visible in all the wrong ways. The next morning, she came downstairs to find Catherine and Walter at the breakfast table, both trying unsuccessfully to hide knowing smiles. "Good morning, dear," Catherine said innocently. "You are positively glowing this morning." Rebecca felt her cheeks heat. "Did Yates tell you?" "He did not have to," Walter said with a chuckle. "That boy has been mooning over you since he carried you in here. We were starting to wonder if he would ever work up the courage to say something." "You knew?" Rebecca asked, sinking into a chair. "Everyone knew except you, apparently," Catherine said fondly. "My son is many things, but subtle is not one of them." Yates came in from outside at that moment, his timing impeccable. When he saw Rebecca, his whole face lit up and he crossed directly to her, bending to kiss her forehead in front of his parents as naturally as breathing. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm and intimate. "Good morning," Rebecca replied, suddenly shy again. The next few months were the happiest of Rebecca's life. Yates courted her with a single-minded determination that would have been overwhelming if it had not been so clearly genuine. He took her on picnics by the creek that ran through the Whitmore property. He taught her to ride, patiently helping her mount and staying close as she grew comfortable with the gentle mare named Daisy. They took long walks in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He introduced her to neighbors and friends, always with pride in his voice when he said, "This is Miss Rebecca Garrison, the talented seamstress I have been telling you about." Never with shame, never with the awkwardness she had come to expect when people had to acknowledge her presence. And slowly, gradually, Rebecca began to believe. Believe that she was worthy of love. Believe that Yates truly saw her as beautiful. Believe that this happiness was not something that would be snatched away. She fell in love with the ranch, with the wide open spaces and the rhythm of the days. She fell in love with Catherine and Walter, who treated her like family. But most of all, she fell deeper and deeper in love with Yates, with his kindness and his strength and his unwavering belief in her. 4 months after that night when he had first told her he was courting her, Yates asked her to go for a ride with him. They rode out to a high meadow that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. The fall colors were just beginning to show, touches of gold among the green. Yates helped her dismount, then led her to a flat rock that made a natural bench. They sat together, his arm around her, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I have been thinking," Yates said after a while. "About what?" "About how my mother always says that when you know something is right, you should not waste time doubting it." Rebecca looked at him, her heart beginning to race. "What are you saying?" Yates turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I am saying that I knew from the night I found you in that storm that you were meant to be in my life. I am saying that the last 4 months have been the best of my life, and I want every month from now until forever to be just as good. I am saying that I love you, Rebecca, with everything I am." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's ring. My father gave it to me after he saw how serious I was about you. Rebecca Garrison, will you marry me?" Rebecca could not speak. The words caught in her throat, tangled up with tears and disbelief, and joy so overwhelming she thought she might shatter from it. "I know I am rushing things," Yates said, anxiety creeping into his voice at her silence. "If you need more time, I understand. But I wanted you to know that I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything." "Yes," Rebecca finally managed to choke out. "Yes, of course, yes." The smile that broke across Yates's face could have lit the whole valley. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he was kissing her, deep and passionate, and Rebecca kissed him back with everything she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me so happy," he murmured. "I think you have that backward," Rebecca said. "You saved my life in more ways than one." "Then we saved each other," Yates said. "That seems fair." They rode back to the ranch as the stars were coming out, and found Catherine and Walter waiting on the porch, clearly having guessed what Yates planned. When they saw Rebecca's glowing face and the ring on her finger, Catherine let out a joyful cry and rushed to embrace her. "Welcome to the family officially," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, I am so happy. I could not have chosen better for my son if I had tried." Walter hugged her next, his gruff voice thick with emotion. "You are a good woman, Rebecca. You will make my boy happy." "He already makes me happy," Rebecca said. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to return the favor." They were married 6 weeks later, in early November, in a simple ceremony in Fort Bridger's church. Catherine had insisted on making Rebecca's dress, a beautiful creation in cream-colored silk that fit her perfectly and made her feel like a princess. It had long sleeves and a high collar, with delicate lace at the cuffs and throat. The skirt fell in soft folds that swayed when she moved. Rebecca stood in front of the mirror on her wedding day, hardly recognizing herself. She looked happy. She looked loved. She looked beautiful. "You are stunning," Catherine said from the doorway. "Yates is going to forget how to speak when he sees you." "I cannot believe this is happening," Rebecca said. "Sometimes I still think I am going to wake up in that storm." "You are awake, and this is real, and you deserve every bit of it," Catherine said firmly. She crossed the room and took Rebecca's hands. "I want you to know something. I have watched you over these past months, watched you bloom like a flower that was kept in darkness finally brought into the sun. You have brought such joy to this family, to my son, but also to Walter and me. You are the daughter I never had, and I am so grateful Yates found you." Rebecca hugged her tightly, this woman who had shown her nothing but kindness and acceptance. "Thank you for everything, for taking me in, for giving me work, for treating me like family." "You are family," Catherine said simply. "Now let us get you married." The church was small but packed with people. Neighbors from surrounding ranches, people from Fort Bridger who had come to know Rebecca through her sewing work, friends of the Whitmore family. All of them smiling, all of them clearly happy for the couple. But Rebecca only had eyes for Yates, standing at the front of the church in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes bright with emotion. When she started down the aisle on Walter's arm, she saw his breath catch, saw him blink rapidly as if fighting tears. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Rebecca would later remember fragments of it. The way Yates's hands shook slightly when he slipped the wedding band on her finger. The sound of her own voice, strong and clear as she said, "I do." The feeling of his lips on hers when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. The cheers and applause from the assembled crowd. The reception was held at the Whitmore Ranch, with tables set up in the barn that had been cleaned and decorated with fall flowers and ribbons. There was food and music and dancing. Rebecca, who had never danced at a social event in her life, found herself swept around the floor by her new husband, laughing breathlessly. "I am not very good at this," she gasped as Yates spun her. "You are perfect," he said, pulling her close. "Everything about today is perfect." As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Yates led Rebecca outside for a moment of quiet. They stood on the porch of what would now be their home, the cabin that Walter and Yates had spent weeks making ready. It was small but cozy, with a bedroom, a main room with a kitchen area, and Rebecca's sewing space. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Rebecca leaned back against him, looking up at the stars. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy. 6 months ago I was alone and afraid, certain my life was over, and now I have everything I never dared to dream of." "We have everything," Yates corrected, "because I get you, and that makes me the luckiest man alive." They went back inside to their guests, dancing and celebrating until late into the night. When everyone finally left and they were alone in their cabin, Rebecca felt a flutter of nervousness. This was a threshold she had never imagined crossing. But Yates was patient and tender, treating her like something precious. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said. "I can wait. I will wait as long as you need." "I do not want to wait," Rebecca said. "I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was awkward at times, as first times often are. But it was also beautiful and tender and filled with love. Yates made her feel cherished, made her feel desired in a way she had never imagined possible. And when they finally lay together afterward, tangled in sheets in each other, Rebecca felt a completeness she had never known. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Yates replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "More than words can say." They fell into a rhythm in the days and weeks that followed. Yates worked the ranch with his father, while Rebecca continued her sewing work with Catherine. But now she came home to her own space, to her husband waiting for her with a kiss and news of his day. They cooked meals together, sat by the fire in the evenings reading or talking, made love and fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Winter came to Wyoming, harsh and beautiful. The ranch work slowed, and Yates had more time to spend with Rebecca. They would bundle up and take walks in the snow, or stay inside by the fire working on their individual projects while simply enjoying each other's presence. Christmas was magical. celebrated with Catherine and Walter with an exchange of simple but heartfelt gifts. Rebecca had made Yates a new shirt in deep blue that brought out his eyes. He gave her a beautiful set of embroidery scissors and a promise that come spring, they would start building an addition to the cabin for a proper sewing room. As winter turned to spring, Rebecca began to feel different. At first, she thought she was just tired from the hard winter and the constant work. But when her monthly courses did not come, and then did not come again, she began to suspect the truth. She told Yates one evening in early April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I think I might be pregnant," she said quietly. Yates went very still beside her. Then he turned to her, his eyes wide. "Truly, I think so. I cannot be certain yet, but all the signs are there." A grin spread slowly across his face, transforming into pure joy. "We are going to have a baby." "It appears so." Yates let out a whoop of happiness and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father." Catherine and Walter were equally thrilled when they shared the news. Catherine immediately began planning, talking about baby clothes and cribs and all the things they would need. Walter, more reserved, simply hugged Rebecca tightly and told her she was going to be a wonderful mother. The pregnancy was not easy. Rebecca was sick more often than not in the early months, and her size made carrying a child more uncomfortable than it might have been for a smaller woman. But Yates was attentive to the point of being overprotective, and Catherine was full of advice and support. As the months passed and Rebecca's belly grew, she found herself overwhelmed by the reality of it. She was going to be a mother. She was bringing a child into the world, a child who would be loved and wanted, who would grow up in this place of beauty and strength. The baby came in late October, just as the leaves were turning golden. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rebecca was certain she could not continue. But Catherine and the midwife from Fort Bridger coached her through it, and Yates held her hand, refusing to leave despite the convention that men should not be present for births. "I am not leaving you," he said firmly, when Catherine suggested he wait outside. "Rebecca has been through hell to get here. The least I can do is be here when she needs me." And when their son finally entered the world, red-faced and squalling, Rebecca looked at him and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is perfect," Yates said, his voice thick with tears as he held his son for the first time. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him James Walter Whitmore after both his grandfathers. James had Walter's steady temperament and Yates's blue eyes, and from the first, he was a happy, content baby. Rebecca took to motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else. She made little clothes for James, soft and comfortable in cheerful colors. She sang to him while she nursed him, old songs her mother had sung to her. She marveled at his tiny fingers and toes, the soft fluff of his hair, the way he would grip Yates's finger with surprising strength. Yates was besotted with his son. He would come in from working on the ranch and immediately seek out James, talking to him about the horses and the cattle as if the baby could understand. He changed diapers without complaint and walked the floor with James when he was fussy at night, insisting that Rebecca needed rest. "You are going to spoil him," Rebecca said one evening, watching Yates rock James to sleep. "That is what fathers are for," Yates replied with a grin. "Mothers keep them in line, fathers spoil them. That is not how it is supposed to work. Then we will make our own rules." As James grew from an infant into a toddler, Rebecca watched him explore the world with fearless curiosity. He took his first steps chasing after the ranch dogs. His first word was "Papa," which made Yates insufferably proud. He was fascinated by the horses and would spend hours watching them in the pastures. 2 years after James was born, Rebecca found herself pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and while it was no easier, she felt more prepared. Their daughter arrived in the spring, a tiny thing with a thick head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the whole ranch. They named her Catherine Rose, after both her grandmother and the wild roses that grew along the creek. Catherine declared herself the happiest grandmother in Wyoming and immediately began spoiling both her grandchildren with abandon. Life settled into a beautiful routine. The years passed, marked by seasons and milestones. James started helping his father with small ranch chores, following Yates around like a shadow. Little Catherine proved to have her mother's talent with a needle, sitting contentedly with Rebecca and doing simple embroidery even at age 4. Rebecca's sewing business continued to thrive. She had built a reputation throughout the area for beautiful work and fair prices, and women came from as far as Cheyenne to commission dresses from her. She began training other women in the area, passing on her skills and creating a network of seamstresses who helped each other. 5 years after Catherine's birth, Rebecca gave birth to another son whom they named Samuel. He was a quiet, thoughtful child, different from his boisterous older brother but no less loved. And 2 years after Samuel came their youngest, a daughter they named Grace. The cabin had been expanded twice by then, growing into a proper house with enough room for their growing family. Rebecca's sewing room was a bright space with large windows and shelves full of fabric and thread. Yates's horse breeding program had become successful enough that buyers came from all over to look at his stock. Rebecca would sometimes stop in the middle of her busy days and look around at her life with wonder. Her 4 children playing in the yard. Her husband coming up the path from the barn, his face lighting up when he saw her. The home they had built together, full of love and laughter and warmth. She thought about that night in the storm when she had been certain her life was ending. And she thought about Yates finding her, lifting her onto his horse, telling her she was perfect for him. It had seemed impossible then, like a dream or a delusion born of desperation. But it had all been real. Every word, every promise, every moment of love and happiness that followed. Yates Whitmore, the elder, passed away peacefully in her sleep when James was 10 years old. The whole family grieved, but they took comfort in knowing she had lived to see her grandchildren and had died knowing she was deeply loved. Walter followed her 2 years later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch. Yates inherited the main ranch house, but he and Rebecca stayed in their own home, the one they had built together. James, showing a strong interest in ranch management, began taking on more responsibilities. Young Catherine surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to open a dress shop in Fort Bridger, following her mother's long-held dream. "You should do it together," Yates suggested one evening when Catherine was 16 and bursting with plans. "Your mother has the experience and the reputation. You have the youth and the energy. Together, you could create something special." And so, mother and daughter opened Garrison Dressmakers in Fort Bridger, in a building Yates helped them purchase. It was everything Rebecca had dreamed of all those years ago. A beautiful shop with large windows and carefully curated fabrics, where women of all sizes and circumstances could come and be treated with respect and care. Where every woman could find something that made her feel beautiful. The shop was successful from the start, and young Catherine proved to have not just her mother's skills but also a head for business. Rebecca taught her everything she knew, and Catherine built on that foundation with new ideas and techniques. Samuel, quiet and studious, surprised them all by becoming interested in medicine after helping the town doctor treat an injured ranch hand. At 18, he left for medical school in the East, promising to return and open a practice in Fort Bridger. Grace, their youngest, had Yates's fearlessness and love of horses. She spent more time in the stables than anywhere else, and by age 12, she was helping train the young horses with a natural skill that made her father proud. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always underlaid with love. James married a sweet young woman from a neighboring ranch and gave Yates and Rebecca their first grandchildren. Catherine married a young lawyer who had been absolutely captivated by her confidence and business acumen. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates took Rebecca back to that meadow where he had proposed. They rode out together on a beautiful fall day, the aspens golden in the sunshine. 20 years, Rebecca said softly as they sat on that same flat rock. It seems impossible. Best 20 years of my life, Yates said, his arm around her. His hair had started to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. But to Rebecca, he was as handsome as the day he pulled her from that storm. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Rebecca asked. "When you found me, I remember everything about that night. You told me I was perfect for you." Rebecca turned to look at him. "I thought you were mad. Or that you were just being kind. I could not imagine anyone finding me perfect." "I meant it then, and I mean it now," Yates said. "You are perfect for me, Rebecca. You always have been. Everything about you, from your strength to your kindness to the way you hum while you sew. The way you love our children, the way you look at me like I am something special, all of it is perfect." "You made me believe I was worthy of love," Rebecca said, tears in her eyes. "You saved me in so many ways." "We saved each other," Yates said, echoing what he had told her all those years ago on this same spot. "That is what love does." They kissed as the sun set over the valley, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a life more beautiful than either had dared to dream. The years continued to roll by, bringing joy and sorrow in equal measure. Samuel returned from medical school and opened his practice, quickly becoming beloved in the community. He married a nurse he had met during his training, and they settled in Fort Bridger. Grace surprised no one by marrying a fellow horse trainer, and they started their own breeding program that complemented rather than competed with Yates's operation. Rebecca and Yates grew older together, their hair graying, their steps slowing. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with every passing year, every shared experience, every challenge they faced together. They became known throughout the county as the couple who had met in a storm, the cowboy who had rescued the woman everyone else had abandoned and proclaimed her perfect. Young people would ask them to tell the story, and Yates would oblige, his hand always finding Rebecca's as he spoke. "The best decision I ever made was riding through that storm," he would say, "because it brought me to her." On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party at the ranch. The whole county seemed to turn out, people whose clothes Rebecca had made over the years, people who had bought horses from Yates, people who simply knew them as good and decent folks. Rebecca stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by the life she had built, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about young Rebecca, alone and terrified in the mud, certain she was unloved and unworthy. If only she could go back and tell that girl what was coming. Tell her that the man riding through the storm would become her everything. Tell her that she would know love beyond measure, that she would build a family and a home and a legacy. That night, after everyone had left and it was just the two of them in their room, Yates held her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life could have been if you had not found me that night. But I did find you, and I would do it again, 1,000 times over. You really think I am perfect?" Rebecca asked, a question she had asked countless times over the years, always needing to hear the answer. "I know you are perfect," Yates said firmly. "Perfect for me, perfect for our family, perfect exactly as you are." Rebecca smiled in the darkness, safe and warm in the arms of the man who had saved her life and taught her how to live. The storm that had nearly killed her had instead brought her everything she had ever wanted. And she would be grateful for that storm, and for Yates Whitmore for the rest of her days. Years later, when they were both old and gray, they would still ride out to that meadow when the weather was fine. They would sit on that rock and remember the storm. Remember the moment their lives changed. Remember all the beautiful years that followed. And when their time finally came, many years later, they went peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. They were buried side by side on the hill next to Yates's parents, overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren would continue the legacy they had created. The dress shop thrived for generations. The ranch remained in the family, growing and adapting with the times. Samuel's medical practice became a full clinic, serving the community for decades. But more than the physical legacy, they left behind the story of their love. The story of a woman who had been abandoned in a storm, and a cowboy who had told her she was perfect. It became a legend in the area, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that worth is not determined by appearance, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the greatest blessings. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the tale, learning from it the values that Yates and Rebecca had held dear. That kindness matters, that everyone deserves love and respect, that true beauty comes from strength of character. That family is built not just by blood but by love and commitment. And sometimes, on stormy nights in Wyoming, people would think of Rebecca and Yates. They would remember that even in the darkest moments, rescue can come. That love can find us when we least expect it. That we are all worthy of someone who looks at us and sees perfection. The storm had been terrifying, but it had brought Rebecca everything. The cowboy had been a stranger, but he had become her world. Together, they had built a life of love and meaning that rippled out through generations. It was a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, a life worth living. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for, to be loved, to be valued, to matter to someone. Rebecca and Yates had given that gift to each other, and in doing so had created something that would outlast them both. The story of the obese woman who was abandoned in the storm, and the cowboy who rescued her and said she was perfect became more than just their story. It became a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, and to the unexpected ways that tragedy can lead to joy. And somewhere, in the hearts of all who heard their tale, the message lived on, that everyone deserves to be rescued, everyone deserves to be loved, and everyone is perfect for someone.